Welcome back. So we just finished 11.4 and now we're going to dive right into 11.5. If you remember, in 11.4 we are comparing fractions with the same denominator. Well, here in 11.5 we're going to compare fractions with the same numerator. So here we go. Starting off on page 507, we have two circles and we need to complete the fraction. So we've got our two circles, and this one's divided into 8. Okay, and that fraction says 1/8. And then the second circle is divided into thirds, sort of like that. Let me see if I can make it better. All right, well, okay, so the second one's divided into thirds. Okay, and so we have 1/3. So you're going to color to show the fraction and then circle which fraction is greater. Well, 1/8, I'm just going to color in 1 equal share of this 1/8. Then 1/3, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to color in 1 equal share of this third. And then it says which fraction is greater. Well, if I were to put my 1/3 circle over top of my 1/8 circle, which circle would be shaded more? So think about it that way. So if my circles are the same size and I only shaded in one small portion here, which portion is larger when it's shaded in? The 1/3 is the larger fraction. Okay? So how could you use fraction strips to check your answer? Well, here, I will show you. So I'm going to have to erase this because I drew it too big. And then how would I use fraction strips? So the bottom is going to be divided into 3 equal shares, each fraction being a third. And then the top one will be split into 8s. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so these are each 1/8. And again, I'm just filling in the fractions in each square because that's how a fraction strip would be represented, okay? All right, so I now have my fraction strips. And then I would need to shade, okay? So I'm going to grab my green and I'm going to shade. So I'm going to shade in 1/8. Actually, let me fix these lines so they look a little more even. Let's do it like there and there. There we go. Okay, so if I shaded in 1/8 of my fraction strip, now I'm going to shade in 1/3 of my fraction strip. Okay, so if I compare one part of the 1/8 fraction strip to one part of the 1/3 fraction strip, the 1/3 fraction is greater. Okay, more of it's shaded in, it takes up more of the space. Okay, so that's what you're using. You are just comparing the two. So here we go. Let's dive right in. All right, so then up on 508, it says, example, compare 2/4 and 2/6. Okay, so this wants us to compare using fraction strips. So that's what we're going to do. So using fraction strips, let me go ahead and draw so you can see they'll all be the same. Okay, this is 1. That means 1 whole. And we are looking at 2/4. We are looking at 2/4 compared to 2/6. Okay? So I need to split this into 4s, or fourths. Sorry, this is 4ths. Okay, and then I'm going to split or divide again into 6. And if you see, I tried to line up where my halves would be so that those would at least be similar. So I can try to get the most adequate equal shares. All right, so that's the first step, okay, is looking at our fraction strips. And then it tells you that this fraction right here is our 2/4 and this is our 2/6. Okay, so now it comes time to shade. So when I'm shading my 2/4, I'm just going to shade in 2 of my 1/4 fraction strips, and then I will shade in 2 of my 1/6 fraction strips. Now when I'm looking at them, which one is greater? Which one takes up more space of the whole? Well, 2/4 does. So 2/4 is greater than 2/4 is greater than 2/6. Another way to think about it is think that 1/6 is not quite as long or as large as 1/4. So that's another way to think. Going right below that example, it says another way, when the numerators are the same, look at the denominators and compare the sizes of the parts. Let me erase this. Here we go, comparing the size of the parts. The more parts the whole is divided into, the smaller the parts are. Okay, so the more I'm dividing it, the smaller it gets. Think back to our circles in the beginning where we were looking at eighths compared to thirds. My third circle, the circle that I divided into thirds, had pretty large parts compared to my circle divided into eighths. The fewer parts of the whole is divided into, the larger the parts are. So even think a pizza, okay? If I cut my pizza into thirds and you cut your pizza into eighths, who's going to have the larger slices of pizza? I would, because I only split mine into 3 parts and you split yours into eighths. So the fraction with the greater denominator is actually the lesser or the smaller fraction. So in that example, it says 1/4 is, and we're comparing it to 1/6. So 1/4 would be greater than 1/6. If you want a visual, there's my pizza split into, let me shade. There's my pizza split into fourths. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not super equal, but there's my pizza split into 6. Okay. Which pizza has the bigger pieces? The 1/4 does. The 1/4 fraction is greater than. Okay. So it's the same example with, if we turn this into 2/4 compared to 2/6, well, let me shade in 2/4 and 2/6. 2/4 is the greater fraction. Okay, so when I'm looking ahead, it looks like, just like in 11.4, 1 through 4, you need to shade in your fraction strips, okay? And you need to compare them that way. But just think, The more parts the whole is divided into, the smaller of the parts. So the fewer parts the whole is divided into, the larger of the parts. So the greater denominator, or the greater fraction, the greater the denominator, the smaller the fraction. 6 is the greater denominator, but look how small your pizza pieces are compared to the fourths, which is a smaller denominator, but look how big those pizza pieces are. So you're going to color and shade. Looking at 5 through 10, again, you are given the fraction with just the circle in the middle, so you can give either your greater sign or your less than symbol, or equal to. You might have a couple that are equal to. So just think, okay, if I have 1, we'll do number 6. So if I have 1/1 compared to 1/6, okay, well, 6 is the greater denominator, but that means I'm cutting my pizza into 6 slices. 1 is the smaller denominator, but that means I didn't cut my pizza at all. It's just one whole pizza. So which is the greater fraction? 1/1 is greater. Again, if you need to, you can always draw it out. I like using the example of pizza. It just makes more sense in my mind, but you like cake or Skittles, whatever you want. So if I were to shade, I would shade in this whole because it's not divided at all compared to the 1/6 that is divided. When you look down even further, so looking at number 11, how could you shade those so you're comparing two fractions with the same numerators? Pick a numerator and shade them, okay? Number 12, it looks like you're playing soccer. So how would you compare, which day do you spend more time playing soccer? Again, you can always draw a picture. Or just compare the fractions, keeping in mind that the larger the numerator, the smaller the pieces, okay? The smaller the numerator, the larger the pieces. Denominator. Sorry. The larger denominator, the smaller pieces. The smaller denominator, the larger pieces. So for 13, it says, you be the teacher, which I love when it says that. So it says, your friend says that 1/4 is greater than 1/2 because 1/4 of the circle is bigger than half of the circle. Is your friend correct? Well, it already gives you a picture, but if you need to, you can divide your own picture and solve that way. Looking at your word problems on 510, again, you need to do a model. In the model, it wants you to draw and shade in your fraction strips. And then when it says explain, it's looking for something like this, where it has the two fractions with the greater than or less than symbol. And so you just need to decide, especially in that first example, whose piggy bank is filled more. And then it looks like 14, you're talking about using 1/3 of a bottle of glitter compared to 1/4 of a bottle of glitter that your friend uses. If the bottles are the same size, who uses more glitter? So you're really just comparing your fractions, and it's a little flip-flopped from 11.4, where when the numerator was greater, you knew that was the greater fraction. So it's flip-flopped here. If the denominator is greater, that's actually the smaller of the fraction. Okay, so my best advice, when possible, split everything into an illustration and just shade in accordingly, and hopefully that will help. See you guys soon.